The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ANSI Electric Vehicle Standards Panel webinar. We'll begin in just a few moments. And Jim Pauley and Jim Matthews, why don't you give a shout out to let me know that you're on the line when you are.
Good morning, this is Jim Pauley. Welcome everyone.
Morning, Jim, thank you. And Jim Matthews, are you there as well?
Yep, good morning, this is Jim Matthews. I'm here as well.
Okay, well why don't we go ahead and we can begin. Thank you, everybody, for joining the ANSI Electric Vehicle Standards Panel Kickoff online meeting. We have a lot of material to cover, and we have sent out the slides and related materials in advance to assist you with any questions you might have. The way we're going to proceed with the agenda is it's basically divided into 3 sections. And there'll be several slides that each of the co-chairs will go through, and then myself. And at the end of each section, we'll have questions. Now, the way to address questions, there are actually 3 different ways to do this. The first way is, if you are logged on to the webinar, is to use the raise your hand function, and then the meeting organizer will unmute your line and we will call on you to ask your question verbally. The second way is, if you wish to write your question, you can use the chat feature, and when we get to the questions portion, we will read out those questions and take as many as we can in the time allotted. If there are more questions than we can answer within the space of the webinar, we will follow up with responses to the questions by email. And the last way is, if you're not connected to the webinar, if you're just listening via the phone, you can send me an email, jmccabe@ansi.org, and I will try and recognize your questions that way. I want to advise everybody that the webinar is being recorded so that we'll be able to have an audio playback for those who were not able to be present after the meeting. So with that, I will turn it over to Jim Matthews to welcome you.
Jim, good morning. We may want to wait another 30 or 60 seconds or so here. I'm still seeing a number of names showing up on the list as arriving onto the webinar. So in the interest of giving everybody a chance to get fully signed in, I'm going to go slow for a second. And all right, it appears to have now calmed down, I think. All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome. For those of you that have been with us for the first couple of activities, thanks and welcome back. For those of you that are new, please bear with us as we go through some material that some of which you've seen before. But I'm excited to say we're getting to the point where we're ready to move forward and go into actually taking some steps towards concrete action. I look forward to today's discussion. Hope that everybody has brought a friend, and we're going to try to see if we can get some progress in this very important area. So with that, let me pass over to Jim Pauley as well to say welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have everybody on the call this morning. Look forward to taking your questions and getting this electric vehicle standards panel off and rolling to a good start. So again, thanks for joining us today.
Okay, let's go to the next slide if we could, please. The way we've broken up today's activity is I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the project overview, what we're doing, the purpose of the panel, why we're going in this direction, what it will and won't do. Then Jim Pauley will step in with some organizational matters, giving us an overview of some of the practical aspects of how we're going forward, and then some very important proposals coming from Jim McCabe based on scope, architecture, and timeline to try and map out what we're going to do. We've broken it out so that you have the opportunity to ask questions at the end of each session, but if you do have a question, type it into the chat function, raise your hand on the function that's on the screen, or send an email to Jim McCabe, and any of those three will get us there, and we'll be happy to take and answer any and all questions. Anything else to add, Jim McCabe or Jim Pauly?
Not at this time, Jim.
Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So I'm looking at the title of EVSP Overview presented by myself, Jim Matthews. If we can go to the next slide, which is really the call to action. We have brought together a lot of different discussions about EVs, and we know that there are a lot of good efforts underway. We already know that we're looking at EVs to reduce dependence on foreign oil, promote economic growth. They're good for the environment, so there are lots of good reasons why EVs are a very high interest activity today. People seem to want to go electric, but there is some uncertainties out there. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or what we sometimes call FUD, go into making people hesitant to make the investment and go forward. And the biggest one of those is uncertainty about range and charging station infrastructure. I can charge it at home, but can I charge it at my place of work? Can I charge it where I'm going shopping? Can I charge it where I'm going for business and other purposes? So government and industry are starting to respond with resources and innovations. Industry would like to make a lot of investment and bring products and services to the market, but industry wants to be sure that there is a path forward. We have to note that in the 2011 State of the Union address, President Obama announced the goal of 1 million vehicles, electric vehicles on U.S. roads by 2015. It's a very ambitious goal, but we've got to start, because if we don't start, we're not going to get there. And our trading partners, I think we talked about this in our last couple of meetings. There are a lot of places in the world, in other regions, where national and regional standards initiatives are already going forward. And one of the best ways to help a market is to have good, coherent standards. One of the best ways to hurt a market is have a patchwork of standards that don't align, don't work well together, and don't intermix. So the U.S. industry, especially all of us here at the call today, need to work more aggressively and cooperatively to keep pace. So we've set a very ambitious plan in front of us, and that's some of the things that Jim and Jim will talk about in a few minutes as well. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I think back one slide, please. Okay. Major shift in our national automotive landscape. We've seen both economic changes as well as environmental changes as well as regulatory changes. But there is an opportunity where perhaps its time is right for the electric vehicle, and these windows don't come along very often. We see the standardization community has to step up to a very critical job to figure out how we can put the pieces in place to make the large-scale introduction of EVs into the market possible. We've talked about that before. That may happen soon. That may happen longer. It may be a slow ramp or a quick ramp. A lot depends on, government, public policy, and other things as well. But I think one of the things we have to do as a standards community is look at the needs in order to make that successful and take as many barriers away from that as possible by writing the proper standards and having the proper patchwork of standards that interface with each other. We obviously want to make sure that the technologies and infrastructure have to be safe and effective. So there has to be proper ways to install charging stations. There has to be all the billing and commercial commerce activities that go with that. But there's some enormous opportunity to grow this industry, and the only way we think we'll get there is a successful partnership with the public and the private areas, both public and private sector working together towards a common goal. All right, now next slide, please. Back one. Thanks. So one of the questions is ANSI. ANSI is uniquely positioned to foster that public and private partnership, and we've been doing that a lot of ways since 1918. The mission to enhance the competitiveness of U.S. business and quality of life by promoting and facilitating the voluntary consensus standards and conformity assessment systems and safeguarding their integrity. In other words, ANSI is really there to help advance the process and help everybody to work with everybody else. Providing global access to international and regional standards. ANSI is the U.S. member body into ISO. ANSI is the U.S. member body through the U.S. National Committee in IEC. There are ongoing dialogues with a lot of bilateral national committees and organizations, as well as groups like the European Standards Organizations, ESOs, that's CIN, CINELEC, and ETSI, and the European Commission. Roundtable in China with manufacturers on a regular basis, and a number of other programs that bring lots of different people together. Next slide, please. So one of those points is to ensure the integrity of standards activities and build public confidence by accreditation services. There's product and personnel certification bodies, certificate systems, all kinds of validation management system registrars, inspection bodies, and laboratories, as well as the standards developers and U.S. technical advisory groups to ISO and the U.S. mirror committees to IEC. So ANSI brings together a lot of different pieces. It approves standards developed in accordance with essential requirements for due process, openness, and consensus as American national standards. But as I often remind people, ANSI does not make standards on its own. ANSI produces the processes that make it possible for those standards to be open, consensus-based, and transparent. We serve as a central resource for information and education on standards, conformity assessment, and all the related activities. Most importantly, ANSI is a neutral policy forum. So ANSI does not have an agenda in this issue other than seeing that everybody gets to be heard and everybody gets to go forward. And the ANSI Federation represents more than 125,000 companies and organizations and 3.5 million plus professionals worldwide. Okay. This slide shows, as we've talked before, about the history of some of these types of activities called panels. And we've done this going all the way back to information infrastructure, homeland security, nanotechnology, coming forward through a whole different range of activities: chemical regulation, sustainability, nuclear energy, cyber risk, and electric vehicles now in 2011. These are a process that has been both honed over time and I think works well over time to try to bring a lot of different stakeholders together. And if we can go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thanks, Trina. So the panels are really coordinating bodies that go across multiple sectors, talk about promoting the development and the compatibility of the voluntary consensus standards and the conformity assessment programs that need to follow to look at new priorities and new technologies. So we talk about panels in the sense that they coordinate the efforts of the private and public sectors. They identify existing standards and compliance programs. They look at where there are gaps and define those gaps so that individual organizations or groups of organizations can go off and work on those, make recommendations where additional work is needed, and identify the organizations that can and willing to perform the work, and again, do not themselves develop standards. So nobody on the panel is going to see the panel developing standards that are in conflict with the standards that the individual organizations and stakeholders are working on. So let's go to the next slide. Let me pause there because that's the general background on ANSI and the panels before we talk about this panel specifically and just ask, are there any questions? Jim McCabe, is there anything on the electronic questions?
We're not seeing any questions at the moment, Jim.
All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So in terms of milestones, you recall we had discussions at the IEC General Meeting and the ANSI Board of Directors in fourth quarter. In the first quarter, there was a lot of discussions, including a coordination session that was held at the USNC IEC Council meeting in January. There was also an E8 roundtable, which is the electric utilities. We had a session in March with the first interim steering committee, polling folks about the need and is this a useful idea. April 5th and 6th, ANSI and DOE successfully held a workshop for standards and codes for electric drive vehicles. April 27th, we held a second interim standards steering committee meeting. And May 2nd, you all received, hopefully, and passed along to many people as well, an announcement and invitation to participate in the EV standards panel. May 5th, there was a briefing to the ANSI Board of Directors, and here we are today with the Ready to Kick Off. Okay. So just to recap our mission, we worked through this in our first session. I think it's still standing up, so that's a good thing. We can move forward from there. But fostering coordination and collaboration on standardization matters among the public and private sector stakeholders to enable safe mass deployment of electric vehicles and associated infrastructure in the U.S. with international coordination, adaptability, and engagement. And where we have stakeholders, the asterisk notes that that includes industry, government agencies, utilities, standards and conformity assessment organizations, code officials, and others. If I go back and parse that a little bit, you look at coordination and collaboration. So fostering coordination and collaboration, it doesn't say write standards, it says let everybody work together and talk to each other. Among public and private sector, again, the very important piece to make sure that our public policy arm and our private sector industry organizations and manufacturers are all working to the same thing. Key stakeholders include utilities. This is real apparent if you look at this, that the vehicle is not an end to itself, that vehicle is a part of a much larger ecosystem, and that includes how the power goes in, where it comes from, how it's billed and metered, how it's connected, what charging adaptations are there and necessary. And then for industry, what innovations can we bring in terms of battery technology, charging technology, slow charging, fast charging, ways to widely distribute that. Safe mass deployment of electric vehicles, safe and mass, because we want to talk about the safety involved. We have to make sure that these vehicles are inherently safe and are able to be fully deployed to the public. And mass deployment, we need to make sure that whatever we do is not a limited trial kind of thing, but truly is necessary standards and infrastructure to allow a widespread deployment in the U.S. And then with international coordination, as I look at the list of participants, and Jim McCabe will talk about that a little bit later, we have drawn folks not just across the different sectors of the U.S., but we have also gotten, both in liaison form and in interest form, folks outside of the U.S., because we note that there are a lot of activities going on in other parts of the world, and people involved in those activities also want to link to this and understand how we can align those as well. And then finally, coordination, adaptability, and engagement. So it's quite a broad mission, and as Jim McCabe alluded to, we've got a very tight timeline to do that. We can go to the next slide, please, deliverables. So we said the first deliverable is to produce a strategic roadmap and or reports that identify the standards and conformity assessment programs we're going to need to facilitate the widespread acceptance and deployment of electric vehicles. So that roadmap is intended to be both a map of as is, but also where we need to go. Provide on behalf of ANSI coherent and coordinated U.S. policy and technical input to the relevant regional and international audiences on needed standards and conformity assessment programs related to electric vehicles. We have a lot of activities going on, and the U.S. has not, to this point, spoken with one voice, and we need to be present in those discussions, and we need to speak to a coherent plan and policy. So to the extent that this effort gives us all a shared view, it will also help us to express that view in the many different forums and organizations and audiences beyond the U.S. to do that. And liaise and coordinate as appropriate with other electric vehicle initiatives that are being undertaken. Again, it's back to, do you want those initiatives to be islands so that everybody is unique in themselves, or do you want those initiatives to be separate and, be aligned and be linked? My wife pointed out a piece that was on one of the NPR programs this weekend talking about China and electric vehicles, and how depending on which area of China you're in, you have different electric vehicles and different standards and incompatibilities. So if you live in one area, you can't drive far because your vehicle is not compatible with another area. And that's just one example. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think the most important part is what we identified from our first meeting, and these are our ingredients for success. So we need coordination. We have to have some way to align and talk about what our different efforts are doing and are they helping or diverging. We need broad stakeholder input. We need everybody at the table. And this means if you're a manufacturer, an automaker, a utility, a standards maker, a conformity assessment organization, a trade association, whoever you are, we need you at the table. We need clearly defined objectives and timelines. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. Committed leadership and participants. I'm happy to say, based on the indications we've seen so far, we've got both of those, and a stable funding source. You just have to add the point that, obviously nothing is free. ANSI does not have a pool of money to go do all this activity, especially under such an aggressive timeline, so we all need to pitch in a little bit in order to make the phrase I've used often, many hands make for light work. So let's work together and see if we can get there from here. And next slide, please. So if you decide to be a participant in this activity, then obviously there are a number of benefits that come from this. One is to be part of strategic policy discussions with access to national, regional, and international standards and conformance bodies. There's a way to leverage cross-industry and global networking opportunities and enhance relationships within the business organizations, industry associations, and professional societies. There will be policy leaders from the U.S. government involved in the rollout of electric vehicles and probably beyond the U.S. government. The biggest advantage is to obtain latest information on key issues affecting market demand and industry events, and help promote the consumer acceptance of electric vehicles by ensuring that the requisite technologies and infrastructure are safe and effective, and by also ensuring that we are all working together towards a common goal. The other benefits of participation in the next slide are to identify your company, organization, or agency as a leader committed to energy independence, reduce carbon emissions, and economic growth. The biggest thing you can bring to this discussion is helping to determine the priorities on standardization issues. So the trade-offs we all have to make between design, performance, safety, interoperability, how are we going to test this, certify the products and the components, and training, and all of those things have to come together and in one way affect your business, organization, or agency. The one I alluded to earlier, speaking from my own perspective as a manufacturer, is we all have R&D activities that could touch on this market, but you want to make sure that you've made a good investment in R&D and you've got at least some aspect of understanding of the market before you bring those R&D activities into production and into the market. So you want to decrease the economic risk and better align those products to new and existing standards and conformity assessment programs to be sure we're all headed in the right direction, and stay at the head of the curve, or at least the front of the wave, in the technical advancement and policy issues to be able to compete in not only the U.S. market, but the global market. So I hope those are all good reasons that you'll join us, you'll participate, and most importantly, as we get to the third part of this and start talking about actual working groups and road mapping efforts, bring your thoughts, your talents, and your perspective. So at that point, I'm going to ask for questions, and if there's not any, we'll turn it over to Jim Pauley. Jim McCabe, any questions?
We do have a couple of questions here. Greg Naminsky, go ahead. Greg, you might need to unmute yourself if you've muted your line at your end. You're unmuted here.
Okay. No, I hit the wrong button, and I'm sorry. I didn't have a question at this point. I think the presentation was quite good.
Okay. Harry Massey from NEMA, go ahead.
Yes, I had a question in regards to the slide on deliverables. We're on mute? How are we on mute? Okay, so we got to go here.
We can hear you, Harry. Go ahead.
Okay, very good. Thank you. This is Harry Massey with NEMA. In regards to the question, we had a question in regards to the deliverables and the second bullet. We are certain that you meant to say that the deliverable will be provided on behalf of industry and others, or who will that deliverable be provided for right now on behalf of?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is Jim Matthews. I'm sorry, Greg. I lost the phone line just as you started to speak.
Jim, let
Someone
me try.
Please repeat Greg's question.
Okay, Jim, the question was actually Harry Massey from NEMA was asking about whether the deliverable that we envision would be on behalf of industry. And I think the response to that, Harry, is that ANSI is a federation of members that includes industry. It also includes standards developing organizations. It includes government agencies, consumers, labor organizations, trade associations, professional societies. So it's a roadmap that will hopefully reflect the consensus of all those active participants.
And especially the utilities and the auto industry and the electric and electronic equipment manufacturing sectors as well. I mean, that's why Jim Pauley and I are both from industry, and that's why we're stepping forward on this issue.
Thank you.
We have a written question from Karthik Krishna related to coordination with SGIP efforts, and certainly that is something that we will incorporate those efforts that are undergoing in the vehicle-to-grid domain experts working group within the SGIP.
Yeah, just to add a comment there as well, you know, that was exactly a point that George Arnold spoke to when we had the interim steering committee discussion. While this is very closely related and a portion of the SGIP work, it is perhaps a work in its own beyond that as well. And there needs to be continued coordination. We expect and see, I think I see Mary Saunders on the line. I see Greg Simmons on the line. You know, there are a number of folks with NIST that are active in this process, and I think a lot of folks from industry as well. But the full intent is to go with our eyes open that this is definitely interlinked with the SGIP, but it is not the SGIP.
Thanks, Jim. We have a question from Mary Reedy of National Grid. Mary, go ahead.
Sorry, no question here. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Jim,
I don't think there are any further questions at the moment, so we want to move on to Jim Pauley's segment.
Jim, this is Joe Batia. Can you hear me?
Hi, Joe. Yes.
Hi. Just want to re-emphasize the point that Jim Matthews made about who was going to be the beneficiary of the roadmap. As we talked about NIST and coordination with them on the smart grid and other related issues, keep in mind there are other government agencies that are also working with ANSI. I'm sure you've been briefed in the previous workshops and other email correspondence from ANSI that we did a project on behalf of Department of Energy. We're also working with National Highway and Safety Administration. We're also working with certain aspects of DOD, especially the agencies that are involved in moving and serving, if you will, the needs of mobility using transportation as a key tool. So we're mindful of the role of ANSI to serve not only the industry needs, especially the auto industry and the suppliers to the auto industry, but also the utilities and the regulatory authorities, as well as federal agencies. So hopefully what we produce would be of tremendous value to a whole bunch of groups. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody, and thanks very much for the comment added, Joe. Yeah, as you look, there are a lot of people around the table, and that's our goal, is to make sure it's an open table. We bring as many of the voices as possible. And with that, now we'll pass over to Jim Pauley.
Thanks, Jim. Again, a pleasure to be with everybody this morning, and I'm going to talk about the EVSP organizational matters, but before I jump into that, I just want to dovetail a little bit on what Jim Matthews finished up. I think this is an exciting area and time right now for the United States with electric vehicles. There's a significant amount of momentum in various areas of electric vehicles, and part of this activity and the way that we're trying to organize is to try to gather that momentum together and really have the whole be more than the sum of the parts. And I think a question that's often come up is, you know, is what we're about to talk about organizationally, is this going to overlap with other work that's being done and so forth? And I want to reiterate that we're not doing the standards work itself in the standards panel. The objective, again, is this roadmap, and it's as much about creating a roadmap that can be used for public policy as it is about understanding the standards landscape. And part of what I do in my day job involves some work in the government relations area, and it's interesting as I've had some discussions with legislators on the topic of electric vehicles. Without my solicitation, standards has come up in those conversations, and the prevailing view seems to be that there's a lot of confusion about the standards, that we don't seem to have a plan on where this is going, that it's disparate activity. And I think that this work that we're undertaking with the standards panel really has the opportunity to bring all of that together and to set a direction forward that shows for the U.S. there is a roadmap to do mass deployment of electric vehicles. People don't want to invest in this type of area unless they can see that there's a positive plan coming forward. And although we often think of standards as sort of mundane technical activities, they are very important to being able to have a plan to ultimately get us from point A to point B. And it's going to take everyone involved in this effort to make this successful, from the supply of electricity all the way through the entire chain of ultimately getting that to the car and consuming it on the automotive end. And it's a comprehensive effort that needs every sector to participate. I think you'll want to be a part of this, whatever sector you're in. If you're touching electric vehicles, and the presumption is that you are, or you wouldn't be on this call, you're going to want to be a part of this effort as it unfolds. I think it's a great opportunity to really build on the collective wisdom of a lot of people that have put a lot of time and effort in already, and be able to accumulate that to show that we have a good roadmap going forward. Which sort of takes me into how are we organized to be able to go do this. Now, some of you that have participated on the last couple of calls and meetings, this will look a little bit repetitive, but you'll go ahead to the next slide. We've structured this to sort of create a steering committee and some groups under. So let me start sort of at the very beginning. The co-chairs, myself and Jim Matthews, who are leading this effort from the volunteer side, are really, what's our role? Our role is to sort of be the spokesperson with regard to the panel activities that go on, to help with working with ANSI staff to plan and schedule meetings of the steering committee, identify candidates to serve as co-chairs of the working groups and members of the steering committee, and to help promote this initiative. And that being said, I do want to go ahead and say thank you to a number of folks that I'm sure on the phone, maybe not all of them could be today, but that have already volunteered, by the way, to begin some of the preliminary work that Jim McCabe will go through in just a few minutes. But we've already had some volunteers and people stepping up to volunteer as some of the co-chairs of working groups, and a big thank you for that. Next slide, please. So what's the steering committee rolls out of this? And the steering committee, the intent of that is to provide the overall sort of planning and strategic direction for the initiative, get the reports from the working groups, consolidate that information, make sure that we've got good coverage across those working groups, resolve any scoping issues or other things that might be between the working groups. Importantly, make sure that the project remains on schedule. I've been involved in a number of these activities over the years, and I will tell you we have a very aggressive timeline for this activity. But that aggressive timeline is driven because we need to get this standards roadmap underway to be able to move forward and to be able to show directionally where this whole effort is going in the United States. There are a number of things that will go on in the fall of this year, and us getting the roadmap together is important to be able to play into those items. I will tell you again, if you just look at the government side, there are a number of things that are going on legislatively with electric vehicles, and it's important that we also have that roadmap to play into those activities as well. And also for the steering committee, the important role there is to identify and recruit participants in the panel. Again, the wisdom of what we're going to create here is made up of the collective of the participants. So again, I urge everyone that's got an interest to participate in the activity. So how's the steering committee structured? Next slide, please. Take a look at the composition of the steering committee. It's made up of the co-chairs as well as the staff. The co-chairs of the working groups are members of the steering committee. And then what we've done is really create a series of at-large seats. And those at-large seats are intended to try to get representation from the various sectors within sort of the EV chain, if you will. So 7 to 10 companies or organizations that would be from the automotive sector, 7 to 10 of those that would be from the utility sector. So you kind of got the supply end and you've got the consumption end, if you will. 7 to 10 companies from the electrotechnical sector, and by that could be from charging stations to, billing to things that are in between that supply and consumption end, if you will. 5 to 7 standards developing organizations and 5 to 7 government agencies. So that, if you add it together, I mean, it's a fairly large steering committee that would be in place. But again, to go back to the purpose I talked about for that steering committee, it's really to try to keep things on schedule, set that direction, do any course corrections that we need to make as we go. Next slide. So nominations for the steering committee. In other words, how do you get on this? Well, as we said, the co-chairs and staff is pretty obvious. The working group co-chairs, we've already had some of those that have volunteered based on some preliminary activity. But individuals that want to participate on the steering committee can be nominated by their own company, by their organization, their agency, a trade association, the SD, an SDO, take a pick. We do want to make sure and make this clear, no more than one individual from the same company, organization, or agency can be an at-large steering committee member. So, we don't want 5 people from one standards developing organization to be 5 at-large members on the steering committee. And by the way, if you're an interim steering committee member, if you've been participating these last couple of times, you do need to confirm if you have an interest in serving on this steering committee now that we're finally creating. If you have an interest in doing that, you do need to confirm your interest by nomination. So whether that's your company, your organization, whatever the case may be. Steering committee members do need to commit to the financial support of the initiative, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, or to a meaningful in-kind contribution. And steering committee composition and working group co-chairs, we're hoping that those will all be approved by the next meeting. If we have more nominations than we have seats available, then we may do a paper ballot election, among the groups. So, that's a good problem to have if we have 20 people all after 10 seats. That's the case. If that happens, we'll deal with it. So that's a little bit about how you get onto the steering committee. Next slide. The working groups. What's the function of the working groups? Well, that's where the work actually gets done. As most of you that's been involved in standards work, really no different than some of the technical standards activity you're involved in. This is getting those group of folks together, those subject matter experts in place to really develop the roadmap that we're after. What kind of things will they be doing? Cataloging the standards, what's published, what's in development, what's under revision that affects that space of that particular working group. What's missing out of this? In other words, the working group gets together and says, we've got 10 standards that apply. We have these 2 spaces that have no standards work going on, and these spaces are going to be critical to deploying EVs. So identify that needed standards work, as well as what organizations might be the potential candidates to perform that work, and what might those target dates be that work could be completed. Identify any harmonization issues of concern, and what would be the recommendations for addressing them. As Jim Matthews mentioned earlier, there is a lot of interest in this internationally. A lot of other regions and countries are working on EV development and roadmaps in their countries. We want to make sure we at least look at that from that broad perspective and try to identify to be able to say these are where there are opportunities to harmonize or where there are harmonization issues. It can be addressed. This is not going to be able to be addressed for these sort of reasons, but make sure that we get that into the roadmap document. We want to do the same for related conformity assessment programs, codes, regulations, and those things that we discover along the way as needed and as appropriate. So the working groups will then draft their sections of the roadmap with support from the staff, and then part of what we will do overall with the help of the steering committee is to assemble that into a complete roadmap. So as I have said in many of these examples, objectives of the working groups is to take this elephant that we've got overall and figure out how we can sort of eat the elephant one bite at a time by putting it into smaller chunks. One action item that we have here is there is a matrix that Jim McCabe has, which I also think was sent out to the entire group. And it's selected standards and coordination activities that are going on. Take a look at that, things that need to be added, updated. Please continue to look at that and get that information back to Jim so that we can use that matrix as a continual working document. Next slide. What's staff's function in all this? Staff will also be the spokesperson regarding the panel activities that goes on. Day-to-day administration, that's where panel documentation, member rosters, email lists, all of those things that go along with a good functioning working group or steering committee. Staff's going to be doing the work to administer to that. Marketing and outreach to recruit participants, and staff has certainly been doing that considerably over the last few months as well. Identify different opportunities to promote the initiative. Those may be other fora that are going on, other events that are going on centered around electric vehicles or around interest in electric vehicles, and identifying those opportunities and either staff or the co-chairs or an appropriate person to be able to go speak to what is going on with the EV standards panel and what our direction is. They'll develop the communications related to the project in consultation with the co-chairs and respond to inquiries from interested parties, from media, and ultimately compile, edit, publish, and disseminate the roadmap overall. So staff, as it always is with these initiatives, staff has a heavy load to keep all of us rowing in the right direction and to help keep us on schedule. Next slide, Jim. So what are the member categories? These member categories really line up with the same member categories that are within the ANSI Federation: company, organizational, government, and educational. Companies, I'm not going to clear that slide, but you can see as it's outlined, it's generally fairly well defined what a company member is. Organizational members typically include scientific, technical, professional, labor, consumer groups, standards that are involved, standard certification and related activities. Most of our SDOs fit into the organizational member category. Government is pretty self-explanatory. That's an agency or a department of the U.S. government or any state, interstate, regional authority, from a governmental perspective. And then educational, an institution of higher learning, not otherwise eligible for membership in one of the other categories, that's interested in the development of voluntary standards. So if you're familiar with ANSI, these categories are pretty familiar to you. If you look at this and go, I'm really unsure what I might be in this case, give Jim McCabe, drop him a note or a phone call, and he can help you sort out specifically where you would fall. Next slide, Jim. So what are the participation fees? As with everything that is done, there's always a cost associated with any activity that we undertake. This is the fee structure that has been put together. So again, for the categories down the left-hand side, company, organizational, government, educational, then there are three basic fee areas. And let me talk about the first two columns. ANSI essentially has two membership categories. An ANSI full member category that basically is someone that has subscribed within ANSI to the full range of services that ANSI offers. There's also an ANSI basic member category, which is what we sort of refer to as kind of the entry level and is more of the, it starts out with the basic, and there are other a la carte services that can be done. And then there are folks that are non-members of ANSI. So fundamentally, one way you can look at this chart is if you are an ANSI member, there is a discount associated with your participation in the EV standards panel. Why is that? Because some of what you are already paying to participate in ANSI is obviously going to help fund some of this activity. This is not a money profit-making for activity for ANSI. The objective is to do cost recovery back out of this, and more importantly, the objective for ANSI is to serve that role, as Jim Matthews said, as sort of a neutral facilitator to help get these roadmaps in place so that standards can move forward, public policy can move forward, and both together in concert. And then for a non-member, if you're not a member of ANSI at all, you can see the fees in the last structure. I will tell you, some of you that are not members of ANSI, out of this, you may want to actually take a look at the ANSI basic member category, or even more importantly, the full member category of what things ANSI could offer you overall. And you may want to look at that at the same time as you're looking at your participation fee in the EVSP. Next slide, Jim. So our objective, as I said, is to help offset the ANSI costs in administering the panels. The discount I talked about a little bit. In-kind contributions are really handled on a case-by-case basis. If you believe there's something there for you, you need to talk to Jim McCabe directly so we can try to get an understanding of that. There is no additional fee to participate on the steering committee. So if you decide it would be important for you to be a steering committee member, that is covered in your fee for the EVSP overall, and there's not an additional fee on top of that. The fee entitles your organization to unlimited participants. I'll say that with a little bit of qualification of going back to what I said about the steering committee. If you're a company and you join, you can participate unlimited-wise in the working groups. Your company can't have 4 at-large steering committee seats out of this. So it is unlimited participants, but that's in the scope of the total project. An action item that you need from here. There is a response form that was circulated with the agenda as well. Please return that response form to participate, identifying your representatives, including any nominations for the steering committee if you're interested there, any working group co-chairs if you're interested there, and pay the appropriate fee associated with that category that you fall into. It's very important that we go ahead and get this membership piece wrapped up as much as we can so that we can get on with the business of developing the standards roadmap instead of a sort of a constant back and forth, you know, is the membership done yet? You know, has somebody joined? Have they not joined? I would encourage you to do that as early as possible so we can focus on the task at hand. Next slide, Jim. So, questions with respect to the organizational structure or any of the items that I covered? And Jim, I'll kind of turn it back over to you to moderate those questions coming in. Jim McCabe.
Okay, we have a question from Bob Vondrasek of NFPA. Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, Jim. Point of clarification. It wasn't said, but I interpreted that if an organization wishes to participate on a working group but not participate in a steering committee, is it true that there's no participation fee for those organizations or individuals?
That was not the intent, Bob.
Okay.
I'm glad you asked the question because it might be something we need to clarify in the materials.
Right. Also, Jim, my other thought was it will also affect our ability to recruit individuals on the working group, so we need a lot more organizations and a lot more people.
Yeah, this is Jim Pauly. I think, Bob, your question, now that you ask it, it hadn't really dawned on me in the past because I guess maybe in my case being sort of seeing this material as it was going along and not taking that step back that people were able to and looking at a broader piece. I want to clarify to make sure, yeah, to participate in the activities that we've got, the working group activities and so forth, is, we do need people to step up, and actually join the EVSP in the categories that we've talked about. So from that perspective, steering committee is not an additional fee to participate, but it's also, the fees are not just steering committee either. They are for active participation in the working groups and the activities of the panel.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, we had a written question from Eric Westgate. He says SAE and ISO are already publishing recommended standards for electric vehicles. How will ESVP differ?
Yeah, I think the important part of that question, I'll go back to what I said, is we're not trying to develop standards themselves out of this. I mean, the fact that they are publishing those is important to the overall roadmap. Our objective of this is to take those items, whether it's from SAE, from ISO, where they're being published, really get those all into one place so we can lay out the roadmap of where is their standards activity that is not going on that should be, where is there overlap in standards activities such that harmonization might be, I'll use the ISO standard as what might be an example, and I don't know what specific he's talking about, but bear with me on a hypothetical that we've got a domestic activity that may be going on and an ISO activity that may be going on that are covering the same space. One of the questions we'd be asking within the EVSP is, should those efforts need to be harmonized? How could they be, or why wouldn't they be, whatever the right answer could be from our US perspective, and make sure we identify those things in the roadmap. So I don't see this as duplicating the question that's being asked from a standards perspective, but I see it as complementary to that. It's to really accumulate that information and lay it out in a roadmap fashion so everybody might be aware of what's happening. And although that question may be directed towards one particular space, the importance of this is laying that same question out among the entire EV value chain, if you will, like I said, from generation to consumption.
Okay, we have a question from Jack Bakshiva of SAE. Go ahead, Jack.
Good morning, Jim and the rest. Could you give us a clue on how you derive the fees? Are they in line with your previous panels? And also, as the project moves on, will you be providing some updates on the financial project management? In other words, how the money is being spent?
Jim, you want to take that, or do you want me to try?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim McCabe.
Okay. In fact, somebody else sort of asked the same question about prior panels, and all of our panels have kind of been unique. They're a mix of private and public sector funding in most cases, in some cases more public than private. We've typically had individuals paying per person a lower fee, but we've never done anything like this before on such an aggressive time schedule. We're basically talking about putting this roadmap together over the next 4 months, and it's going to be very labor intensive from the administration standpoint, where hopefully we're going to try and minimize making it labor intensive from your standpoint as participants. But we basically looked at what we thought we needed in terms of a budget to accomplish the goal. We looked at our current ANSI membership categories, what had been assessed on prior fees, what we thought was reasonable, what we thought organizations and companies would be willing and able to spend. As Jim Pauly noted in the presentation, we wanted to offer a 25% discount to nominate the to recognize the contributions that those who are already supporting the standards infrastructure and ANSI's bottom line are making. So those were all factors in our review. It's important to note that all of these panel activities that ANSI provides are, to the extent possible, fully cost-recovered activities. And so, again, ANSI is a nonprofit 501c3. We need to have the right source of private and public sector funding in order to be able to deliver on what we've heard from you, the stakeholders, as a market need. So I hope that answers your question, Jack.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of questions from Michael Johnston of NECA. Is there an official deadline for paying the participation fee? And he also asked, do the working group participants have to be from the organizations paying the participation fee? Let me take that, Jim, and if you want to jump in with anything. I think, and the answer to the first question is, we obviously, again, this is on a very aggressive time schedule. We haven't set an official deadline. We would hope that, you know, you'll see as I move through the slides, we're asking basically folks to kind of return their forms indicating interest basically within the space of a week. We would hope that, we understand if you need a little bit of time organizationally to determine the financial end, and so we have not set a hard deadline, but we would hope that, you know, we would have those commitments during the month of June. In relation to, you know, if whether working group participants have to be from the organizations paying the fee, I would say not necessarily. I mean, if your organization is a membership organization, you can identify your representatives as you see fit. I hope that answers your question, Mike. And I see you're not able to.
Thank you, Jim. I think I was cleared. I think you can hear me now.
Okay. Yep, we can. Okay. Let's see. We have a question from Danny Ackerman at Standards Institute of Israel, I believe. He asks, will standards development work identified by the EVSP be introduced into international standards organizations or developed nationally? I think, again, we're looking at the fact that this is going to capture work that is of standards that are developed across the board, whether by any organization. We're looking for to capture the full range of standards that have been developed or in development or under revision that relate to this topic. As to whether or not certain standards will be progressed internationally, we've said one of the priorities is to identify the need for additional standards that haven't already been developed. But again, that dialogue will come out of the discussions that we'll take within the working groups.
Jim, it's Jim Pollington. If I could just add to that, I think a key part of that in saying, you know, will these progress on is depending on where that standard is developed. That's part of the decision that ultimately that standards developer and the participants within that standards process also make. So ANSI doesn't make that decision, you know, for the standards developer. So there are, you know, those decisions go on every day in our standards landscape that happens, and what we're doing in the standards panel is accumulating that information and so forth and identifying a roadmap, but directionally where that standard goes really goes back to that developer and those participants and the tags and those groups that are normally involved in the process.
And Jim McCabe, this is Jim Matthews also with a comment that, you know, you have a lot of people at the table who are involved in some of those standards processes, both on the domestic side and the international side. So to the degree that the roadmap helps us to paint a clearer picture of where we are and where we're going, then the natural process is going to be for those involved in, say, the ISO piece or the IEC piece, for one example, would say, well, we know there's this activity going on over here in this group, and it may be worth reaching out to them because we don't want to see things diverge from their work. So it's going to help those people who are involved in these processes to, while they won't necessarily directly go take the work to the international, it'll be a lot easier to point back to the work that's going on and say, here's a good model to build upon.
Jim McCabe, this is Joe Batia. Could you put me in queue, please?
Go ahead, Joe.
I am at the front of the queue. Okay, great. Just wanted to elaborate on the issue of international coordination. I just came back from COPAN meetings in Santiago last week, and I had an opportunity to discuss electric vehicles, or e-mobility as they call it in Europe, both with the head of ISO, Rob Steele, and also with Ronnie Emmett, who is the Secretary General of IEC. And both of them are very interested in what's going on in the U.S. They are very familiar with the standards panel that we are assembling, that we have assembled here, that we're talking to today. I think the idea here is to facilitate dialogue when it's appropriate. Jim Pauly said it best. He said that each of the standards developing organizations whose intellectual property would be identified in the roadmap has a decision to make as to how they proceed. Whether that engages an international forum or not is up to them to decide. It's not ANSI's role to make that call. Our goal is to facilitate connectivity, facilitate participation in the right forums if that international linkage is desired. And that doesn't have to be development of a full-fledged IEC or ISO document. It could also be a step toward conversation or making compatible, if you will. In some cases, all you can seek is non-exclusivity with some of the criteria or some of the requirements. I think that's a good step in many cases for industry to have available. So I think various stages of harmonization all the way to ultimate development of an international standard or acceptance of a national standard that is accepted and used internationally, and we have several of those, to be accepted in a formal way. All that exists. And the liaisons that may be appropriate for us to consider down the road, which involve a given organization in the international arena, be it IEC or ISO, we have the opportunity to dialogue with them. That's what I talk to these guys about. We have the ability to take, for example, a standard of organization A, which is headquartered in the USA, but their documents are used and applied by industry all over the world. There's an opportunity for that document A to be considered in liaison with an international document, either as a replacement for what was being considered or as a compatible document to be endorsed jointly by the two organizations if they choose to do so. There are many, many paths available, and the international linkage that we're seeking out of this roadmap is absolutely dependent on the standards organization, their advisory group, their tag, whatever their committee is, and their desire to proceed as they see fit. I think all we're doing is putting it all together and making it more visible and more transparent, and then we have many options to consider. The probability of us having similar initiatives take place in some part of the world are pretty damn good. So I think one thing we can do is avoid duplication and redundancy, and if that comes out of the roadmap, that would be a contribution.
Thanks, Joe. I think we'll take one more question that's been raised on the financial side, and then in the interest of time, I'd like to move into the discussion of the scope and architecture. George Willingmeyer had a question about what are possible in-kind contributions, and the answer to that is really our greatest need in terms of any face-to-face meetings that we might have would be those who might be able to accommodate large meetings where we're talking anywhere from 75 to 100 people, possibly with some breakout rooms for the working groups. And we're looking, to the extent we're talking about face-to-face meetings, either in Detroit from a resource conservation standpoint, since that's primarily where a lot of the folks in the automotive sector certainly are located, as well as in Washington, D.C., since a lot of the trade associations and the government agencies are there. That is kind of the greatest need in terms of the in-kind contributions. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and if we can flip ahead to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about the scope, architecture, and timelines for the EVSP. And I will mention that as a result of our steering committee meeting on April 27th, one of the action items, and we had some discussion around what we mean precisely by electric vehicles. We've heard the term e-mobility also mentioned in some of the other work, and so a task force was formed to look at what we need when we talk about electric vehicles. So it was proposed that we use the NFPA 70, the National Electric Code 2011 definition. NFPA 70, of course, is an American national standard. It is widely, universally adopted in the United States in terms of electrical installation and safety, and that seems, the consensus seemed to be that was as good a place as any to look to for direction in terms of what we mean. So basically, as is indicated on the slide, I don't need to read it to you there. You can see that the focus is on automotive-type vehicles, and that I think was added in the 2011 definition that would include plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And then it also talks about some areas that would not be included. So when we talk about the EVSP work here too, again, we have our sort of initial focus for our roadmap over the next 4 months. And what we've said is that we can look at potentially the needs of maybe what we would call sort of related issues or stakeholders as we move forward, but the initial focus is on road vehicles. So next slide, please. So again, our scope for the initial focus for the roadmap is to apply that NFPA definition. Again, we primarily mean on-road vehicles that contain a battery that is rechargeable by the electric grid and the associated infrastructure needed to develop that. We also thought, just to sort of clarify, that it might be helpful to provide greater clarity in terms of what is not included. So those exclusions are what is set forth in the NFPA 70 definition, but specifically that it doesn't include watercraft, aircraft, or vehicles on fixed guideways, for example, rails or monorails, and trains or trolleys and things like that. There was also a discussion about what about conventional hybrid electric vehicles, and the group recognized that while this is not specifically relevant to the whole discussion of the need for the built infrastructure, that there may be some issues related to safety, for example, for emergency responders, such that we might want to at least sort of acknowledge those vehicles, and if there are any particular standards that appertain to those, to recognize those as well. So I'll continue now, and we're going to take questions at the end. So let me go through the architecture, if you'll continue. Basically what we have come up with is sort of 3 high-level domains: vehicle, infrastructure, and what we call support services. And underneath those, we've established 8 working groups. And I'm going to go through each of these and the various elements that, and certainly we're not going to necessarily capture every single issue area for each of these working groups, but just to give you a sense so that you'll better understand where you might want to participate. So in the vehicle area, we have energy storage systems, components, and then the user interface. We've broken down the infrastructure area into charging systems, communications, installation, and again, kind of the user interface. Recognizing, again, this whole idea of consumer acceptance is kind of key to all of this. And then under support services, we have education and training. So next slide, please. So we've called this the Energy Storage Systems Working Group. Obviously, from the slide, it's about batteries. All the issues around safety, testing, labeling, storage, transportation and handling, recycling and secondary uses, as well as issues of concern in terms of the emergency responder community and having emergency shut-off location procedures and consistency there. Next slide. In the vehicle components area, again, this would be looking at things like electrical safety and onboard wiring systems, cables and marking, vehicle diagnostic systems, how components in the vehicle interoperate with one another, and component ratings and safety issues. We have the vehicle user interface group with, again, I mean, these are sort of consumer-facing type issues. So things like graphical symbols and dashboard icons, what information is provided relative to things like fuel efficiency, emissions, and labeling, noise and audible warning systems. Obviously, these vehicles are much quieter than conventional automobiles, and there's some safety issues around that. Performance testing that might take place, and obviously in terms of safety, crash testing and any particular aspects related to that. And then telematics, you know, with GPS and again, in terms of roadside assistance and emergency responders, you sort of have the whole community working on those telecom issues that relate to providing assistance to the vehicle. On the infrastructure side, we have the Charging Systems Working Group, which contains several areas. Obviously, the whole discussion of the various charging modes and the couplers, connectors, the emerging issue of inductive or wireless charging, and battery swapping being another alternative in terms of charging systems. We have the whole area of the charging stations, equipment, and the EVSE and electrical safety. Charging accessories, the area of electromagnetic interference, the idea of the vehicle being able to supply energy back to the grid, and then the use of alternative power sources. In the area of communications, obviously communications with the grid is key, looking at things that are underway in terms of billing and payment systems, and then related issues around cybersecurity and data privacy. And then, of course, on the installation side, we're looking at things like residential charging station installation and permitting that is necessary in the U.S. at least in terms of installing any of this equipment in a residential setting. Issues related to load management, when are consumers going to be charging their vehicles at night, and what are the related impacts on the grid? What happens in cases of power outages? Are there standards to deal with sort of emergency situations like that? And then in the area, again, of sort of the user interface, graphical symbols that would, you know, maybe be related to the on the charging station itself, and then in terms of, you both have the residential side, and then when you're talking about public charging locations or battery swapping locations, dealing with issues such as signage, lighting, security, and then of course accessibility, ensuring that that those facilities would be in compliance with things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's a lot of work there in the infrastructure domain. And then certainly last but not least, again on the support services side, we're looking at the way that information about these vehicles and the infrastructure will be conveyed to consumers and what more can be done there to facilitate consumer acceptance. We also want to look at the needs of the emergency responder community in terms of doing their job. Your basic automotive technicians, what sorts of qualifications or training are they going to need on these new vehicles in order to make them safe and able to perform as expected? The insurance industry has a stake here, as do code officials, authorities having jurisdiction to enforce relevant codes, and so all of these communities there is work that is taking place in terms of educating and training them on what's being done in the EV area. So what we need again, and we'll come back and we'll take your questions on the actual architecture that we've outlined here. And again, this was we had a group of about a dozen subject matter experts came together last week and helped iron this out. But what we're looking to do here is, in terms of the working groups, we ideally need 2 or more volunteers to serve as co-chairs to ensure that the work proceeds on schedule, and to help us, with coordination and convening conference calls. We need, hopefully, within each of those working groups, in the sort of sub-issue areas that are identified on the slide, and again, there are probably dozens more that are not specifically identified that are issue areas. If we can have 1 or 2 or more folks step up to kind of be the leaders in each of the issue areas, that again will sort of go to the Jim Matthews mantra of, many hands equals lighter work, and so it can really go a long way towards helping us to achieve what we've done here, what we were setting out to do. Again, you can name as many representatives as you feel is necessary to cover each working group, whatever is most appropriate in terms of your organizational involvement. We do have, and included in the materials that went out, there was a copyright form relative to the roadmap, and I just want to say a word or two to be clear about what we're doing there. And the idea is we're not looking to assume any copyright of anyone else's materials. It's just to kind of put folks on notice that when ANSI puts out this roadmap, that if you make a contribution to the roadmap, if it's written, that you understand that, particularly if you're putting someone else's information before us, that you either have authority to do that in terms of you've been assigned that copyright from the owner. If there's any doubt, we're in most cases are simply referencing materials, and to the extent there are standards that are going to be referenced here, again, we're not assuming or asserting any sort of copyright over those. It's really the final roadmap that ANSI is saying this is going to be, copyrighted in ANSI. We'll reserve the right to publish it and to disseminate it, and that's really all that is. So it's kind of just a pro forma, just so you're aware, and folks who are making contributions are aware of that issue. So if you can sign and return the copyright form to ANSI, we would appreciate that. There is, in the package of materials, there is a response form that also includes the working group sign-up sheet, and you need to name your representatives and then submit those if you have nominations that you're willing to or interested in serving as a working group co-chair, to indicate that and return the form. Next slide. Let me talk, well, perhaps it would stop there, and let's just go back before we talk about the timeline and just see if there are any questions. Jack Shiva, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes, Jim, the breakdown that you provided, is it finalized? Is it still up for changes, discussions, comments, and so forth? And this is the reason why I'm bringing it up, because there are two sides, two worlds of this charging issue. There is the vehicle side, there is the grid side. When I look at the breakdown, I could argue actually whether couplers should be under infrastructure, because I would say that from a vehicle standpoint, that's the other end of the cable. We also have a coupler that goes into the vehicle and presents the vehicle domain with unique issues. similarly with inductive wireless charging or with communication with the grid. So is it something that would be worked out in the process of discussion?
I think the answer to your question broadly, Jack, is yes. It is something that we will fine-tune as needed. For example, if we see when we send out the forms or people return them that there is very little interest in one area or that one area should be consolidated with another, if you have comments such as Jack just made, I think it would be actually very helpful to the work if you could submit those in writing. Again, there's probably a lot of different ways that one could segment the work. What we tried to do was construct it in a meaningful way in terms of what we've seen where people are participating in terms of technical standards committees that are developing these areas. There is a lot in the charging systems working group. I certainly understand that. And if it's necessary to have separate working groups for inductive and conductive, I mean, we can certainly look at that as well. So we do welcome that feedback.
Okay.
Can I add a comment there?
Please do.
I was going to say one thing we had talked about, and maybe we can figure out as we sort this out a little bit, but it may be appropriate to talk about it in terms of the vehicle-to-grid interface. If you can just capture that as a thought, we'll obviously put that in the mix for discussion going forward.
Okay. Bob Vondrasek, you have a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, I saw in the infrastructure installation working group, you put residential charging station installation and permitting. It would seem there's a counterpart for commercial locations and even public locations, and I'm not sure that's covered anyplace else.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're just still here monitoring if there are additional questions. We have one from Larry Frakes. Okay, sorry, it looks like we're having some audio issues there. Okay, well, I'll ask folks to continue collecting your thoughts, and let me proceed through the timeline then, and we'll come back to. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, next slide, please. So again, what we're looking to do here is to we've asked folks if you can return your participation response forms and the nomination for working group co-chairs and steering committee meeting within the space of a week. So again, it's a very tight timeline. And then again, sort of to the point that was raised, we will confirm the working group architecture, participants and the co-chairs hopefully the following week, so that we'll have an agreed upon structure to go forward. We're looking to basically, again, do this largely in a series of biweekly phone calls, so that we would have the first sort of working group conference calls the week of June 6th, so that folks could get together and, just to sort of get to know who is on your working group, identify issue area leaders to identify the existing standards and those in development. Again, the sort of the first aspect that we want to capture is kind of the cataloging aspect of everything that is out there before then moving on to talking about the priority areas in terms of needed standards and related harmonization issues. We felt that it would be very useful if we can arrange it to have a face-to-face meeting of the group and we're targeting June 21st as a date. We will confirm that. Again, we're looking at possibly doing that in Detroit because there is a related meeting the days following that might be very useful from a resource conservation standpoint in terms of folks who we think will be contributing actively to this work. And the idea behind the face-to-face meeting would be, again, to kind of bring everybody together, get to know one another in this setting, and begin the process of sort of breaking into, if not specific working groups, at least into sort of the domains that we've identified, and begin the process of identifying the standards and having some discussion around the different priority areas and harmonization issues. So mark your calendars, hold that date open if you can, and we will confirm that in a subsequent communication. Then we will continue from there, again, largely with conference calls biweekly. You know, we're hoping this is not going to be more than an hour every couple of weeks where we can just review where we are. Again, people would be feeding information to ANSI via the working groups and the issue areas, and we would be collating it in a meaningful way and beginning to compile this roadmap. We would likely be targeting the week of July 25th for a possible face-to-face or conference call meeting of the steering committee to kind of have reports from the working group co-chairs and hear where we are in terms of the progress. And obviously we'll adjust our timeline along the way as needed to accommodate the needs of the panel. Next slide. You know, then we're into having additional conference calls as needed during August and into early September, and we would hope that, you know, by the time we get to early August that we would be able to begin drafting sort of narrative sections of the roadmap, such as they might be, if there are any priority areas to be that are felt to be addressed. We, again, are asking if folks can hold the date for another possible face-to-face drafting meeting. That might not necessarily be a meeting of the full group, but it might be those who have agreed to play a leadership role in terms of working group co-chairs, where we would you know, maybe use the time immediately prior to another key event, which is the SAE NFPA Summit in Detroit. And again, from the resource conservation standpoint, looking to do that as much as possible. We would hopefully present at least preliminary aspects of where the roadmap is headed at that summit. And our target date here is kind of to be able to unveil version 1 of the roadmap in time for World Standards Week. I guess World Standards Day is typically October 14th, but we are planning meetings with the European standards organizations on October 12th, and the subject of electric vehicles is slated to be one of the areas that gets discussed. So again, it's a very ambitious timeline. We'll adjust as appropriate. And but this is the goal, and I think if those of you who've been involved in ANSI panel activities before will recognize this is kind of unlike anything that we've done before in terms of sort of this ambitious plan. And as both Jims have laid out, it's really going to require your assistance to help us achieve the goal of putting this together so that we can be prepared to speak more coherently going forward. We would anticipate after we have at least version 1 of the roadmap that we would certainly make the broader community aware of the good work, and we are in touch with, along the way, key government agencies and officials as conversations regarding electric vehicles are happening at a high political level and policy level in the government, and so we will want to be prepared as much as we can to kind of be responsive to those. And then we would also look at what additional work needs to be done in terms of going forward. Okay, so let me look here and see the queue if we have additional questions. And I think at this point it's kind of questions on any aspect that's been covered during this segment or during the call as a whole. So we have a couple of questions from Mario Bayer at DIN, the German standards body. He asks, will there be a group that summarizes existing studies, in particular catalogs of standards that already exist, in order to analyze them in advance and to avoid double work, for example, referencing the fact that the German roadmap and the European Senelec focus group. The answer to that is obviously capturing everything. We've certainly seen the German standards roadmap. We look forward to receiving the final work product of the Senelec focus group, and I think it's fair to say, and the Jims can chime in here if they like, but we certainly want to look at and carefully study those documents as closely as possible so we have a good understanding as U.S. stakeholders what is being envisioned in other regions of the world. Jim, do you have anything you want to answer to that in addition?
Well, this is Jim Pauley. I mean, I guess, directly to part of the question of do we have a separate group looking at this, I think the answer to that is no, but the intent is to make all of our various domains that we're trying to structure aware of all of that information so that they can take it into account. If it proves to be so daunting that we need another group to look at it, I mean, I think we could probably take a look at that. But at this point, we're kind of putting it in each of the domains' hands. As we get,
I don't have a lot to add except to say that, obviously we don't want to duplicate work and we want to take advantage where there's momentum and move forward. But we also have to remember that the purpose of this panel is to look at, North American centric, and we want to link to those interfaces and other efforts where we can as well.
Mario also had an additional comment that there's a strong need for close collaboration of the working groups that deal with the interface. I think this sort of goes to Jack Pakshiva's point of the vehicle charging interface, the charging station interface, and communication. So I think that's certainly acknowledged, and that's one of the ideas behind the steering committee, is that the co-chairs certainly will be having or helping to assure that there is that liaison. We have a question from John Young of Siemens Energy. Are copyright forms by company or individual? The answer is by individual. We have a comment from Larry Frakes. He says there is a significant push for DC fast charge. Fuel stations and highway rest stops are among those looking for this solution. Will the CHAdeMO standard be addressed, and will it receive some level of priority? Again, I think we're wanting to capture everything that is already out there, and I think that one of the points of discussion would be the different connectors and systems that are in place for charging.
This is Jim Matthews again. To add on to that one, Jim McCabe, you included an updated list of all the activities you had become aware of based on information, but I would ask and urge people to please continue to send anything that you're aware of to Jim McCabe so we can get that on that list as well.
Dale Carnos of the Association of Global Automakers makes a good point, noting that some of us will participate in multiple working groups, so please try to schedule the meetings so they do not overlap. And that is absolutely crucial, and we will do all we can to ensure that that doesn't happen. Dante Casali from the American Boat and Yacht Council asked the question, will boats and other off-road vehicles excluded from this project with respect to those, is there a forum for that group to participate in this process? And again, I'm not sure if you're asking if there is a separate forum, Dante, but I guess what we've sort of said is at the outset, at least for this first phase, we're looking at on-road vehicles and related infrastructure in terms of what the primary focus is. I think there were some comments in the call last week that it being contemplated in the 2014 revision to the National Electrical Code may be that anticipating that there might be more activity in that particular area.
Jim McCabe, it's Jim Pauley. If I could just add to that, maybe. I think you know, one of the answers to that is certainly you are welcome for those off-road and watercraft. You're welcome to participate in this activity, realizing that I realize there is some overlap, particularly in some charging and in some battery systems and some commonality there. I think to just reemphasize what Jim McCabe said, just want to make sure that everyone's aware up front that we're focusing on the road type infrastructure piece of this. So as you know, as you won't see a working group talking about, you know, watercraft infrastructure build out for recharging aspect of this, but certainly in the areas where there may very well be overlap from a technology and standards perspective, because those things have to be recharged, they have battery systems in them. You know, there may be opportunities there for folks to participate. And certainly welcome to participate wherever you would like.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Jack Pakshiva, SAE, you have a question? Or is that from earlier?
No, it must be from earlier. No.
Okay. Bob Vondrasek, NFPA, do you have a question? Okay. Okay, Harry Massey from NEMA, you want to go ahead?
Yes, we have the question, will the EBSP be addressing WTO and TBT issues in the context of this product category?
Jim, it's Jim Pauley. I guess you know, might need a little bit of clarification in what context. If you're talking about TBT and technical barriers to trade sort of aspects, I don't think there's I think those are always being looked at as you're trying to look at standards development activity that may cross you know, into those areas out of it. But you know, maybe a little more clarification on specifically what's being after. We don't have a group off studying anything specific in WTO or TBT, but you know, a little more.
Jim, this is Al Skolnick with NEMA. I was just thinking that if you look at the smart grid activity at NIST and you use that as sort of a parallel activity, there's a real interest in trying to harmonize or at least get reciprocal adoption of IEC and ANSI and IEEE standards to facilitate harmonization of the grid. And I was asking that question in the context, if you end up with issues that are in the way of adopting a U.S. position, a North American standard, is there some facility in the ESVP to begin to address these things?
Well, Jim, this is Jim Pauley again. I mean, I think part of that, Al, is as the working groups get into their areas and they get those various activities that are either already developed or underway and so forth, one of the things that we've asked to look at is, you know, can you identify opportunities for harmonization, you know, that we should be looking at further, or in some cases they may identify that there are parallel activities that are going on in one region of the globe versus in the U.S., and identify reasons why those might not be candidates for harmonization. But I think that question's open to the working groups to be able to address. I suspect it may be more pertinent to some than others as it comes up. So I guess in simple, we haven't excluded it, but how far that gets delved into is probably going to depend on the standard and the particular topic at hand.
And I agree. I was just raising that because it had not come up at all as one of the working group activities. That's all.
Al, this is Jim Matthews. I mean, the other thing is that, obviously the panel may not be able to solve these things, but certainly what it can do is bring sunshine to the fact that there are differences, and then if people are involved or willing to try to work to solve them, that's a good thing.
Harry, I think you also had asked a question, who will define the scope of each of the working groups? I mean, I think we're starting from the standpoint of what we've laid out, and again, if that needs to be tweaked or modified, we can do that, but if we can simplify matters and proceed with the structure as presented, again, if folks have significant concerns about it, please convey those to us and we'll look at that. But again, this can be sorted out, I guess, at the first meeting that we have. I know, George Willingmeyer, you've had your hand up here now. You asked one question, will the list of attendees from this call be made available? The answer to that is yes, but if you'd like to go ahead, I think you had another question you wanted to ask as well?
Well, actually, I didn't ask that question. Somebody else must have asked it. I'd like to make a short statement and then a question. First of all, I'm very, very pleased to see ANSI undertake this initiative. I think it has both a substantial interest among the community of interested parties that have a stake in the topic, but it also has a political implication, because I see it as a test bed of whether the private sector will create analogs to activities such as the SGIP. Somebody mentioned a couple minutes ago the SGIP activity that NIST is sort of overseeing. The NIST just recently assembled and shared the results of all the public comments of the request for comments on the proper role for the government in standard setting. And one of their comments that they saw in the reply, I'll just read to you. NIST's convener role is appreciated and valued. Many respondents expressed the view that the convener role is government's most appropriate role in standard setting. Well, that's correct. From their point of view, and this is not to say anything negative about ANSI or about NIST, but my politics are more on the conservative side than the liberal side. And here's what I said with respect to the question of the government's role. I said, in my comments, the government has important vested stakeholder interest in regulatory and procurement and international trade considerations. The government must be careful, however, to remain responsive to these primary missions and responsibilities and not venture too far into the role of convener, particularly if offering such convener opportunities competes with numerous private sector venues and fora offering similar neutral roles of convener.
Do you have a question, George? Or?
Well, yeah. Well, okay. I'm trying to be helpful, Jim. I'm trying to say that this thing has political implications, and whether it succeeds or not is whether it needs to succeed or not. And I'm trying to say to the participants here, you have an opportunity, and I'm sorry if it's not coming across that way, Jim. I'm trying to be helpful to ANSI. So the ultimate question is, here is a standards policy consultant. I have an open door to participate in this SGIP activity without participation. I may not be able to participate in the ongoing activities of this activity because I can't afford the due schedule. Can you imagine there's any role for me to play as GTW Associates, as a standards policy guy, in helping this thing get along and further its activity?
Well, in terms of, we will certainly, if folks want to request a hardship waiver, you can send that request to me, and again, like the in-kind contributions, we'll deal with those on a case-by-case basis. Thank you for your comments, George. We had a question from Dennis Odson, who asked, will the working groups be harmonizing directly with Canada electric vehicle standards?
Jim, it's Jim Pauley. Again, I think, from my perspective, it's important to recognize that the working groups are not doing the actual standards work or the technical work within the standards. Might a working group identify that there's a parallel set of activities in Canada and the U.S. and that it's a candidate for harmonization? They could perhaps come up with that recommendation, but the actual decision on harmonizing and the actual work to do the harmonization really flows back through the normal channels that would occur in whether you had this standards panel or not, and that would be among the two standards developers involved and among the stakeholders that are specific in that particular area. So I could see it being identified potentially as a candidate, but the decision as to whether or not it's harmonized is really over in that camp.
Harmonizing but he's asking Schneider that question.
Hi, we're getting some feedback from somebody. If you're not speaking, if you could mute your phone. Greg Naminsky, you have the floor.
Yes, two questions. One, the presentation you have, I assume, will be published. And to comment on your calendar, the June 21st date has been committed to a group of meetings in Detroit with the EPRI committees. Certainly, I think people would like to participate, myself included, and probably several of the EPRI people, but the 21st is probably not workable for us.
Greg, in answer to the question, the first one, yes, we'll post the materials online. They'll be publicly accessible from this meeting. It's my understanding that the EPRI Infrastructure Working Council is actually the 22nd and 23rd in Detroit, and it was precisely for that reason that a lot of the key stakeholders would be present for that meeting, that we were looking at doing something on the 21st.
Yeah, 21st is committed to working on the 2014 electrical codes. An EPRI committee working on that as well. So there'll be several people that won't be available on the 1st.
Okay, well, we'll revisit and look at dates overall. This is one of the things we're finding that's incredibly challenging about this, is there's so much happening in terms of overlap. And again, what we're trying to do is, we've heard the message loud and clear that folks want to, they wish there were more hours in the day and want to conserve resources, financial and human resources, as much as possible. So we're looking to kind of accommodate that as much as we possibly can.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, we seem to have a pause in the questions, and so why don't we move ahead to the next slide, just to kind of review the action items that we are looking for folks to do in the next week. We'd like you to return the participation response form, and by doing that, you would be confirming your interest in participating, agreeing to pay the fee, and specifying how you want to do that. If you're interested in being nominated for the steering committee, there's a place on the form to indicate that. Obviously, providing us contact details for your representatives so we can start to build additional distribution lists in the case of working groups, to name the specific representatives for the different working groups on the sign-up sheet. And if you have any folks that you want to nominate from your organization to be working group co-chairs, you can indicate that. We also have the copyright form that I mentioned if you to sign and return. And as was pointed out, the additional document that was circulated with the meeting materials was the matrix of standards activities and coordination initiatives. and that will be an ongoing updating of that document, and we welcome your feedback on that. I guess it's not listed as a bullet here, but to the point that was made during the call, if there are suggestions regarding the organizational structure of the working groups, please pass those on as well. So again, we want to take advantage of the fact that we've got you as a captive audience here, and since we're doing this on such an aggressive timetable, we'd like you to, if you can give your attention to this and get the forms back to us as quickly as possible, that would be very helpful. I mean, secondly, to a point that was raised, I guess on the front end of this, if you want to, if you're interested in considering ANSI membership, our membership would be, in order to take advantage of the discounted fee for full ANSI members, our membership director, Brian Meinke, would be happy to speak with you, and I'd be happy to put you in touch that way. So Jim or Joe, if any of you have any additional thoughts that you would like to convey.
I'll let the co-chairs speak. It's their forum.
This is Jim Pauly. I mean, I think my final comments are thanks to everybody for participating today. You know, down to the point of this where the real work really gets underway at creating the roadmap, and so we need your help and expertise in getting through that. But you know, get the info in to join the panel, and again, thanks for your time and effort today. So I'll pass it maybe over to Jim Matthews.
Yeah, this is Jim Matthews. I can only add to that exactly that. Thanks to Jim McCabe for a lot of the hard work and background, because that staff work is really what keeps us all glued together and on track. And like Jim Pauly, I'm very excited that we're now at the point where we're ready to put the car in drive and go forward and actually do some of the work and break up into groups and have a face-to-face meeting. I know we'll work out the dates and times and logistics, and look forward to seeing you there. And in the meantime, let's bring everybody along and go forward to a big table and make some progress on this. Thanks again for all your help and participation.
And certainly, just as a final thought, if there were any that folks had or that occur to you after the call, obviously feel free to send those, and we'll try and get you answers to inform your decision-making as quickly as possible. With that, thank you all for participating, and we look forward to continuing the discussions as we go forward. So thank you very much.